I'll start by saying that I got it wrong when I picked McAuliffe to win in Virginia. I could just excuse myself by noting that I didn't have birth times for either him or Youngkin, but I think it's best to just admit the mistake and look to see what can be learned. In McAuliffe's chart, I surmised that the pressure his Mars was getting from Saturn wouldn't be bad enough to counter the positive energy of transit in Jupiter, still not that far away from his Sun degrees. However, I do remember thinking that a planet that is leaving the Sun degrees isn't going to be as good as if it's right there or if it's approaching. And the Mars is part of a fixed grand cross that for all intents and purposes was getting strong Saturn pressure. In other words, it's not just Mars, there are 4 planets involved. Translation is never underestimate the power of Saturn to deny you, especially when so many planets get affected at the same time. In Youngkin's chart, Saturn becomes much more of a problem next year as it runs into the degrees of those later Scorpio planets. More importantly, however, in doing the political autopsy of what just happened in Virginia, a look at history is very informative. In the near term, when the Democratic vote drops by more than 800,000 votes and you lose an election by less than 100,000, the first line of blame has to be with the Democratic Party voters. If you don't vote, you can't win. It's that simple. And even if Republicans also voted less than in 2020, their drop was only about 300,000. So this just reinforces the argument. The Democratic side dropped by a lot more. A second point would be to say that a big part of the concern about this loss is related to the intensely polarized political era in which we live. If you remember how inspired Democrats were in 2008 after electing Barack Obama, you might forget that in the 2009 Virginia governor election, a Republican won a lot more handily than Youngkin just did, and he was replacing Tim Kaine, the previous Democratic governor, which is pretty much the same situation as today, but back in 2009, most Democrats didn't think it was that big a deal. Where it does become a big deal is if, as the media is now suggesting, this loss might mean 2022 midterm results mirroring in any way the 2010 debacle. And the media, for sure in the right-wing echo chamber, but also the so-called mainstream centrist media, is prone to sensationalizing and fear-mongering. As an example, look at this headline saying Democrats got shellacked. Last I looked, the shellacking implies a trouncing, when in fact the final count was pretty close and actually a pretty good result when compared to the usual margins in Virginia governor elections. But if next year is like 2010, then yes, it would be very bad indeed. But this is where I would urge everyone to remain calm, because the planetary cycles of the relevant political players continue to lead me to believe we are not going to experience a return to 2010 losses, and I continue to believe the Democratic Party will do very well in the 2022 midterms. I'll close by saying that my disappointment on this one is really with the Democratic Party. I wonder when, if ever, Democrats are going to realize that almost every election lost since the turn of the century has been due to Democrats failing to show up to vote. We outnumber the Republicans more than enough to beat them every time. But if we can't be bothered to vote each and every time, how can we expect to win consistently? However, at this point, this one is done. I say let's remain calm and move on to the next one. But for God's sake, vote. Let the Republicans keep yapping about how it's all rigged. Let them say whatever they want, but just make sure you vote.